Welcome to the Eskrima Podcast. My name is Jason Enai, and I'm an Enai Eskrimador. So, wanted to talk today a little bit about last night's class. I have a private lesson with Patrick. Prior to that, we worked on Filipino boxing, Panantukan. Tuesdays is Panantukan and JKD. We practice those two things together, mostly to keep the JKD fresh in my mind for when I go to Inasano instructor camp, as well as for teaching the striking portions in the Spider Dumog system. But I mostly enjoy the Panantukan, honestly. I'm still biased towards Filipino martial arts, mostly because I find it to be rich in culture and rich in just depth. There's a lot of depth there, right? However, seeing the Panantukan out there, and then what my father taught me, and what's popular, obviously the terminology is popularized by my Uncle Dan, and there's some people out in Europe that have really popularized the mitt drills and things like that. And let's take a tangent. Why do we like that so much, right? It's just looking at a reel as I was getting ready to go to work here, and some people say, how much they loved Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they're talking about how, it helped them, and that's great. Every martial art can help you. Could Filipino martial arts help you? Certainly. A lot of it, though, it has nothing to do with the art in and of itself, and a lot more about our physiology. So, elevated exercise. First of all, when you go into a class of any kind, it could be a spin class, yoga booty ballet, right? Pilates, your average kickboxing, fitness class, a la Taibo or whatever, any kind of elevated exercise. First thing that happens is your physiology breaks. So whatever troubles you're experiencing are at least lessened. Maybe you forget about it. Maybe it goes away completely, or at least you just get a respite from your day or your life, right? In the form of exercise. So people immediately go, oh yeah, spin class is the best. I feel so great after. Well, good. You should. And everybody needs that. If we're not experiencing that in our martial arts training, whatever our art is, it's because the program that you're doing, the instructor, whatever, has not done a good enough job about getting you to move, right? And part of that has to be about you as the student not talking and not, trying to interject your own whatever into the class, because you're just taking away from everyone else's experience. And you're probably screwing up the instructor's objectives as far as what they're trying to achieve in class. So for me, I want to break your physiology when you come into class. I want you to move, right? And by moving, you can bring yourself into the room better, more wholly, physically, right? No cogitation needed. Now, as you progress and say Krav Maga, so the thing that Krav Maga brought to at least American martial arts that was only missing since maybe the 60s, which was this strenuous physical activity, right? That was a big thing. There's a lot of calisthenics, a lot of hard work, and some intensity in the training. And to some degree, some organizations and schools, there was various levels of intensity of sparring, right? Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the only thing it really brought back to the martial arts community is regular, consistent, contested training, sparring, right? What they call rolling. Sometimes they call it fighting. right? Which I've talked about on other episodes, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I've taught Krav Maga. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now and help teach it, mostly as a result of my Uncle Dan and Aunt Paula, insisting that I needed to learn that when I first joined the Inosanto Instructor Association. And it's fun. But I know why it's fun. I know why I like it. It's not because I learned a new wrist lock, or all of a sudden now I know how to armbar, or any of those things. And I understand I'm a different case than the average human being doing any one of these endeavors. The thing that happens after the physiological break, which changes your emotional state, is continued physical exertion, contested exertion, will elevate your endorphins in general. You'll get a dope drop, maybe you get a little bit of serotonin, whatever it is, whatever that neurochemical cocktail is, putting yourself in the right mind, as long as you're there for the right reasons, you walk away feeling like you did the most amazing thing. You feel great, right? And you feel like you're in a fight. So you walk away thinking, oh man, I'm really there, I'm getting there, I'm doing a thing, right? And even if you're like the white belt that's getting trounced, right, you still walk away feeling pretty great, especially if you continue to have that right mind of the white belt mind, or whatever the attitude. And so you walk away doing that. Same thing happens in kickboxing classes. These are classes, the kickboxing classes I'm talking about specifically are the ones where, you're punching a bag, you're doing mitt work, you're doing calisthenics. Great stuff, great for your fitness or anything like that. Maybe there's a little bit of technique where, you dodge a mitt and then you get up and, you stand back into your stance and you throw a couple 1, 2, 3s, right? And then you throw a round kick or two, whatever it is. Also still good, great stuff, right? But the reason why we walk away thinking it's the greatest is not because it is. It's because of the physiological effects of breaking your physiology, continuing to elevate your physical exertion, and receiving, a neurochemical cocktail that elevates your mood. So, in any martial art, if you understand this physiological process, even as I do as a layman, you can understand how you need to elevate your training and do those things. Now, there's other effects that I incorporate into what I'm doing with my training and my lesson plans. But those two things are really, really important. So there's your tangent, right? So we did the Pontoon, it was great. It was a lot of fun. Elevated heart rate, all that good stuff. Physiology break. But the way that I'm approaching Pontoon is like more from a protocol basis of like, okay, the average, let's just assume that the person that we're fighting can punch. That's the first assumption, because most of the Cadena de Mano that I use initially for people to start with makes the assumption that they can't, because most people cannot, right? They have the wild haymakers and all that other stuff, and you still need to know how to be able to defend them. And while Pontoon from the aggression side would still work against that kind of opponent, a lot of the defenses that we work on are less relevant and not at all needed. So, I'm approaching it from that point of view, and the first thing that we're working on is our limb restrictions. Seekos to the hand. Really enjoyed that, and then we had class. It's a 1 hour affair. I start off with basic defensive tactics, as I call them, for solo baston. This evening we did some elastico hit and evade, some regular hit and evade, multi-tool or mixed tool sets, right? And then I showed the Cabo Ruan two-handed blocking system that I learned from Ramiro Estelia when I was over at the Inosanto Academy, just as a means of teaching a rudimentary blocking system. some other stuff. And then I have them do a 1-for-1, hit for hit, where they try to incorporate their simple defenses, their defensive tactics, as well as their more complex defenses. And the objective there is for people to have a basic self-defense, just like I would teach in Canadian Mono. I have to teach in solo baston, double baston, and dagger, right? Some basic self-defense, right? Maybe we do sword and dagger, although if you're using sword and dagger, you shouldn't be using basic simple defenses if you don't need to. Or rather, they should be more elegant than that, right? I'm only really trying to teach you to survive at that particular level. So we work on that for a little bit. Really not the point of getting into that, other than for you to understand that I was utilizing those drills and things to break physiology, develop some reflexes, right? Constantly doing those reflexes. That's very much like fighting, trying to get you involved, but more not on the physical exertion level, but to develop strategy and tactics, to utilize the tactics of the simple defenses and the complex stuff like Sarada and things to lead you into the strategical considerations of fighting, so that you're playing a game of chess, if you will, metaphorically, right? And then I delegate. So I delegate the class to Lahong Guru Chris Castle. Chris has been with me for over 20 years, and essentially a 5th degree black belt under me. Perhaps one of the better examples of learning my teaching methodology. Very good with the terminology, very good with the concepts and principles, very good with developing his own way of teaching. Him and Lauren far exceed my expectations when it comes to their ability to teach and understand someone else's process. Chris more so, I think, though, right? And that's not to take away from Lauren or Justin. They all, the ones that teach with me here in Los Gatos, they all have their own teaching ways, and they're very good at what they do. And they're actually, I watch students gravitate towards Guru Justin. I watch them gravitate to Guru Lauren. Different students, because not every teacher is for every student, right? People have different life experiences. They also, communicate differently, and the 3 gentlemen that teach with me on a regular basis now have that way. If Master Cicero DeFanti, my uncle Frank, who learned from my father, Angel, Max, and Leo, right? When he's there, we get him to show us stuff and tell stories and things like that, right? But last night I delegated the bulk of the class, right? I think I taught till about, maybe 7:48. So for the first 18 minutes, we did the reflex training and the warm-up stuff and things like that. And then I delegated, and longer Chris, we filmed everything, right? So eventually that'll show up on the membership site. But Guru Chris really focused on some aspects that we learned from in Kitty D'Amato from the Carenza that we use, attributed to Great Grandmaster Max Sarmiento. Now, I'm not going to really talk about what he taught other than where it came from. It's really interesting stuff. It was right down the path of logic that I would have taken, which is great. It would have been great if he did something a little bit different. His approach is slightly different than mine, but I like his approach. And the way that he activated the low line usage of the feet for different purposes. Right? What I want to talk about is the delegation. I delegate for a couple of reasons in those classes. Main reasons. One is, as a head of the system, it's my job to make space for my instructors to teach, and then I can give critique if I need to, compliment if I need to, or just simply observe their development, because that's a big part of it. As a mentor, you have to leave space for someone to try things out. Now, the other side of it is what I call the observer effect, which is, I'm borrowing from science again in the way that I teach. Well, what I notice is if if I directly insinuate myself into the learning experience of a given student, it actually can hinder the process, retard the process, right? So I'm standing right next to two people on Saturday. Little Aurora, she's got to be like 9 years old, right? And we're doing Sinawali, and I'm standing right next to her, and she spends at least a quarter of the time shifting her eyes to me and then looking back at her and instruct her partner, right? And I've had numerous occasions, whether it be in Wisconsin or Scotland, or even when I taught in the Philippines, right? Taught in Tokyo, right? Or I'll teach something and I'll let them do their thing, but when I walk near them, at 15, 20 feet away, they were doing it fine. I stand next to them and they notice that I'm next to them and they don't do it so well. So, or the other side of it, I remember a moment in Wisconsin. This is in Green Bay, Wisconsin, teaching at Master Shinovek's facility at the time. We're outside doing one of the summer camps, and my dad's still around. And we would, tell them something that if you've learned from me or my father, you would have heard many times, which is get your hand up. I remember probably about 2000, maybe 14 or 15, I attend one of my Uncle Dan's seminars. Some of my dad's former students show up, and there's a little bit of friction there, but they're doing their training, and I'm watching them out of the corner of my eye, they represent my family name. Their hands are down. Senior level instructors, one hand down by their genitalia, as opposed to up, which any respectable Eskrima would have their hand up. And anyway, we're in Wisconsin, and we tell them to get their hand up, and hands up as soon as we stand next to them. But I'm 30, 40 feet away, hands down. Now, I'm a rambunctious Lahong Guru at the time, so 5th degree black belt, if you will. For those of you who are not in the system, that just give you some equivalency. And this guy that I've been harping on, and who who's good and he wants to be good, got his hand down again. Right now, most of these guys are karate guys, taekwondo guys, and they have good etiquette, good ethics, good discipline. But this is not part of their discipline, because wherever they come from, they just don't have that operational excellence. And so I throw my knife at him. So there's two ways to throw a knife, and there's a number of tactics that we teach in the United System of Eskrima in the usage of projectile weapons, thrown weapons. But there are two ways to throw a knife. There's the flip and the no flip method. At least those are the two ways that I know. So I do the no flip method a lot. And the way that you do that is, when you throw the knife, you throw in such a way as that the knife has no spin as it leaves your hand. It's a simple way to explain that, enough for the story. And I hit this guy in the hand, just right in the center of the hand. This is down by his genitalia, which is to say it's just hanging by his side, at the groin below waist level. It's not a useful place for your hand if you're learning to fight with a sword, a stick, or a knife, or even just empty hand. It's not a place for your hands, right, in general. Nail him, point first, and then say, get your hand up. And I don't say it, I yell it. So, never had to tell him that. Which brings me to, experience of my father. He has this protocol. He'd be like, get your hand up. This is when I'm 7, 8, maybe even 9. Probably 7 and 8. Get your hand up, get your hand up, get your hand up. And then he'd come by and he'd tap me in the hand, the stick. Get your hand up. Just a tap, gentle tap. Him saying that, my hand's down. I'm feeling his stick, and he's basically saying, get my hand up. Very, very simple idea, right? Get my hand up. A couple classes later, hands at a whack. Get your hand up. Boy, that hurt. And my hand was up. And maybe once or twice later, my hand was down, and I got a tap in the head. I didn't need to be hit in the the head to learn my lesson, my hand was up, right? So I like this, and I still use this protocol much more gently than my father, but I'll still hit the student if it's necessary, right? If the student will only learn through pain and fear, I am not opposed to using those tools. It's just that most people don't like going to the class where you learn the most. Those two teachers, pain and fear. So I try not to use them if I don't have to, but I'm not above it. And but the thing I don't like about it is it's part of that whole observer effect, right? I picked up this saying, it was something like a trained animal obeys the master when the master is present. A tamed animal obeys the master with or without his presence. Something to that effect. And I don't mean that people are animals or anything like that. It was just this idea that I can train anyone through behavioral shaping to do just about anything, right? If you understand true conditioning in behavioral shaping. And I can, but then again, I can tame that one. Which taming is basically a little bit stepping further beyond just merely training. This is behaviorally shaping someone so that they behave under certain conditions and exhibit certain behaviors without the need for operant stimuli, right? And ultimately, as an instructor, I shouldn't have to be there in the middle of your fight to coach you through your fight. If you need a corner, it's not a fight. It's a sporting match. And while those guys are bad, it's still not a fight, right? I'll tell you, fighting a gangbanger, I didn't have anybody there while he's trying to stab me, right? I don't have anybody there to coach me. I have to pay attention, right? I have to be that tamed creature that is fully conditioned and does not require the help of a coach or a teacher or a mentor in the midst of it. Or at least maybe then I at least carry his voice with me, right? That's what Charlie said. Charlie said that when he got attacked by that homeless guy, I had talked about this a few episodes ago, right? Where the guy attacks him with a knife from behind, essentially, and he's straddling a bike, and he begins to do the defense, and he disarms him, and he's dealing with the whole thing. This kind of lasted longer than maybe a 15-second altercation. It's probably closer to like 3 seconds. I mean, someone walks up behind you, swipes at you, you do a defense that you learned when you were 7, and you're now 18, right? And then you quickly disarm them, something that you probably didn't ever really perfected in the time of training, but you put so much time into it from the age of 7, maybe 6 to 16, right? And he said, I could just hear you talking to me, no, that's not right, not that way, and critiquing him, telling him what to do in his head. So he carried my voice with him in that altercation, but he didn't need my coaching. That's just the way that your brain recalls the information, right? Recalls the conditioning. And that's what I'm looking for is that kind of ability. So when I delegate sometimes, or when I remove myself from the learning experience, I'm trying to get it to the point where I don't have to be present for you to do it right? 90% of the time with Patrick, who trains with me on average six times a week, I don't have to tell him to do stuff. He just does it right. It took years and years and years of doing that and his own effort and energy, but there it is. I did it, right? For the gurus, I pretty much don't have to tell them. 1% of the time, maybe I have to remind them about something, but I don't need to, right? And removing yourself from the experience is an important part of teaching, right? And it's an important part of mentoring, and it allows for something that's more important and more salient to all of you who probably don't teach, that will be listening to this now, today, next week, years from now, right? Is I have to let you grow. I have to let you experience, right? While your instructors can teach you to do something, it's also beneficial to provide a controlled experience, guide rails, if you will, where you get to explore something, make some mistakes, learn from those mistakes. I can tell you to do a technique any guru, sensei, sifu, wherever you're actually training. If you're not training in the United System of Eskrima, I would say you should train in the United System of Eskrima from the United Training Organization in my lineage. But wherever you're training, right? We could impart some pearl of wisdom or just some vanilla technique that you like, don't like, whatever. And you could practice it 500,000 times. And maybe it surfaces, that behavior emerges under duress, and maybe it doesn't. That could be your learning process, that could be the way that the instructor is teaching you to, etc., right? But then, through the path of emergency, one of the 5 paths of learning, you're a little bit of a pickle, and you're in a kerfuffle, a scrape, and somebody does something, a bottle, I don't know, something happens, and it loosely approximates something that you might practice in your regular training, and you do something, and in retrospect, if you're being honest with yourself, wasn't the most efficient defense, but it works. Maybe you attempt a defense that you've been taught, you didn't do it right, it's a little bit misshapen in some way, out of time, whatever, but it works. Maybe you do something completely different, and it works. I could tell you till I'm blue in the face, don't do it that way, it's wrong. But because of your empirical experience, your direct experience, as opposed to some bottled theory that I've given you in the form of a calcified curriculum, right? Your empirical knowledge will always trump that. So, going back to the very beginning of the class, and the beginning of pretty much all my classes for the last 18 years, I provide experiences through physiological breaks in the warm-up training that allow you to gain empirical experience that I can leverage in the teaching. I am actually not looking for a perfect technique, because having been in so many scrapes, working in bar security, event security, and hunting bad guys and taking them to jail, that empirical knowledge is very, very useful, very, very valuable. And why fight it? As an instructor, why would I fight that wave when I could ride that wave, right? How is that not a better expression of flow? And also cherishing your direct personal experience, right? Which I want to honor, because it's useful, and it saved you, and I get to teach you because it saved you, right? And you get to learn from me because it saved you, and you can get better, right? That's the whole idea. And maybe I can become better for your anecdote, right? So I remove myself from the training, just like you as a student must remove your conscious mind from the experience sometimes and just flow with the lesson, right? Allow the lesson to happen to you, and allow the Eskrima to happen to you, so that you become an Eskrima faster, and that path that you walk to becoming a 9 Eskrima is pleasantly surprising. I'll see you guys on the training floor.